supposed to end last week. But then, of course, I had to cancel one class because I wasn't feeling well and I didn't want to come in and, expose people to whatever it was that I was having. So we have extended it to today. And so I think some people probably have other plans already. But anyway, in any case, those of you who are able to come, both in the temple and on Zoom, thank you for coming. So this is the last of this series, and what I can say is that it didn't exactly turn out the way that I was imagining it to be. In part, I'm not as organized as I would like to be, and then secondly, I think, it's laziness. A little bit lazy, and so therefore ended up being not turning out exactly the way that I was hoping or imagining that it would turn out. Nonetheless, some of you stuck with it, and thank you so much for continuing to have an interest in this particular set of lectures. So what I want to do today is to actually continue the set of slides from last week. I think it's an interesting topic. It's something that, is worth continuing to spend some time to look at this particular topic, which is basically it's the relationship between how the Buddha relates cosmology to psychology, we could say that. And there are deeper implications to just cosmology or psychology. Because of the Buddha's particular way of connecting these two things, cosmology being the macro level and psychology being the micro level. So it is possible to, for example, consider the cosmology described as symbolic of mental states. And that has allowed a particular strain of Buddhist practice and thought developing, especially now in the West, in a way that need not entail literal rebirth and multiple lifetimes. And that's where it really comes from, because of the particular way in which the Buddha connected cosmology and psychology. Having said that, I would also say, I think we are reading too much of our modern sensibilities back into the ancient material to completely then insist that, come on, surely it's just psychology, How can there be, these other realms, right? It's not that that position is not legit. It's legit. If that's the conclusion you come to. I think overall the Buddhist tradition doesn't insist on orthodoxy in a way that maybe other traditions do. So it's legit, but it would be, I think, intellectually dishonest to say this was surely what the Buddha taught, and then later superstitious people, brought all these other things back. We don't have evidence for that. Instead, what we do have, the evidence that we do have, tells us, that no, pretty sure, even in the earlier stages, that cosmology is treated as, well, you think this is real? All those other places of existence also real. But at the same time, the Buddha also says, this reality is not as real as you think. So to that degree, you can say the other realities are also not as real as you think. But again, it would be intellectually dishonest to say only those other realities being described are not as real as you think, whereas this reality, very real. So you can't take one and ignore the other and say this is, cohesive. Or to say that this has always been. Of course, I think What Buddhism is in part, from at least an intellectual point of view, what every generations, interprets it to be. There's no pope, or there's no, Dharma police enforcing, this is right, that is not right. Yeah. And often you see teachers, including one of my teachers, who will say, it doesn't matter whether it's literally real or not real. If you know how to skillfully take the take-home lesson and apply those lessons to your life, that's most important. So now let's look at some of the details of this cosmology and how it connects to psychology. Okay, let's see if I know how to do this. Ta-da! Oh, not yet. And then what? How to full screen this?
Mouse to the upper left corner.
Upper left corner here.
Yeah, and then little lower.
View?
Go down a little bit.
Hold on. No?
Oh, there you go. That does it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Ooh, no, I don't want this. Oh, yeah. Yes, so in these early Buddhist sources, there are quite a few texts that describes or record, for us how the Buddha did talk about the evolution and the devolution of our universe, and by extension of other universes. Now, this is against the background of, I think I mentioned this, but it's worth mentioning again, generally speaking, the Buddha did not talk about origins of the world, evolution of the world, destruction of the world, separate from the more central issue of suffering, cause of suffering, end of suffering, the cause for the end of suffering. Yeah, so in that sense, you could say, to the degree that cosmology and cosmogony, the origins of the cosmos, to the degree that it was discussed, to the degree that the Buddha, you could say, explained or revealed what he saw, it is only for the purpose of how might that make a difference to you now? Like, what are the implications of, given that the world evolved in this way and would devolve in this way, what implications does that have on what we can do now? So this cosmology, this cosmogony, if it sounds very theoretical and speculative, understand that it's just because I'm extracting it out of its context when it was being discussed, in order to have a slight call, right? Evolution of the world. Bear in mind, especially in the early sources, the Buddha didn't care to particularly talk about such matters. And that's why elsewhere I've said that, he wasn't a metaphysician. He had no interest in metaphysics. He wasn't an ontologist. He had no interest in making these abstract, and blanket statements about, everything came out of this, or we'll go into that. No, his method doesn't involve those types of speculations. And even as much as he taught about karma and multiple lifetimes, right? Again, in the early sources, whenever people question that or challenge that, he would never say things like, I saw it, and it is true, and you should believe me. He never said that. He also did not do Jedi mind tricks. Let me show you if you don't believe. Here, I'll take you. Now, elsewhere, something like that did happen. So whether you want to believe it to be literal or not, he did take his cousin into higher God realms, but not for the purposes of teaching him cosmology. Apparently, this cousin was getting married. And in the good old days, or at least the way they talk about it, men only married because whoever they were marrying was beautiful. As if that was the only reason and the only concern. So this cousin was getting married. But then the Buddha sort of saw the situation and said, his karmic, bank is ripe for a change of heart now. So the Buddha calls him. I think it was Nanda. He said, come Nanda, you should consider joining my order. And Nanda is like, no. It's like, I'm getting married this weekend. And the Buddha said, why are you so excited? He was like, have you seen my future wife? And Buddha was like, yeah, I know her, And Nanda was like, yeah, and you're asking me this question? Am I excited? Buddha said, let me show you something. So he took Nanda's hand, apparently. And the next thing is, they're in like this, dreamy world. And then all these beautiful goddesses turn up. And the Buddha said, what do you think? It's like, wow, right? And then, and the Buddha said, after a while, Buddha said, okay, we gotta go. He was like, no, why? Buddha said, you have a wedding this weekend. He was like, forget about that. Right? So he was like, wow. Buddha said, hold on, here, took his hand. Then they're in another realm. Now even more beautiful than the last one. Yeah, basically, right? You know how the story ends. Then back down to the earth, back down to the human realm, and the Buddha said, you see all of that? And then it says that Nanda, like, yes. The Buddha says, I have not shown you what's even better than all of that. You want that? And Nanda said, yeah. He said, okay, now you join the order. And apparently he became a monk. Yeah, so to the degree that, right, Buddha actually showed someone, but otherwise, whenever there was questions about karma and multiple lifetimes and rebirth in better realms of existence or worse realms of existence, whenever there are questions or doubts about it, the Buddha would always answer those questions with reasoning. Not discussing cosmology, not using magic to show someone that karma is true because, of using magical powers to convince them, or just to tell them, trust me, I have seen it. He uses reasoning. Yeah? So anyway, I think this kind of framing is important. Yeah? So when we look at all the early sermons of the Buddha, the early teachings, the teachings of the Buddha that are recorded in these early sources, and this is the picture that emerges. First of all, as I mentioned, it's quite clear that Buddha taught that the world in which we live in is embedded within a universe that has these 31 planes of existence that I talked about last time. And all of this then constitute one world system, or what we would call one universe. In this universe, in this world system, the beings that inhabit this world system, as long as this world system exists the way it exists, the beings that exist there are directly related to how the world system is set up, so to say. So in other words, the collective karma of the beings that inhabit a particular world system results in the world system having a particular form, having a particular number of levels, and the world system also evolves and devolves in relation to the collective karma of all the beings that inhabit. Now, obviously, it's very complex. Yeah? But this is the general principle. Yeah? So the world evolves and devolves. In terms of the evolution and devolution, there are said to be generally 4 stages. So the formation stage, the stability stage, the dissolution stage, and the stage of absence. Then from there, after, and all of this happens over long, right, periods of time. We talked about kalpas, right? How long is the kalpa? Yeah. So these stages of evolution and devolution. Yes.
Is a world system have a scale? Like, can a city be a world system, or a country, or is it just like Earth?
When we're talking about world system, it's not just Earth. It's all the 31 planes, with all the gods and all the god realms, all the realms beneath, all of that. It's one world system. Yeah, no, they're not talking about cities. Yeah, even this world, they say, is only one corner of a 4-cornered human world. Yeah, one continent, they say. What our known world is only 1 out of 4 continents that human beings inhabit. Yeah. Now, in one early text called the Aganya Sutta, yeah, it also talks about what happens when a particular world system gets destroyed. So here, before you think, this is some kind of a Buddhist end times scary scenario, actually it's not. It's a very interesting hybrid of what we're used to when it comes to the end of the world. The end of the world, according to the Aganya Sutta, is one whereby the way this world system gets destroyed is that the lowest realm gets destroyed first, which means the hell realms gets destroyed first. Now, why would the hell realm get destroyed? Because the karma the karma that allows the hell realm to exist is finished for the beings within that world system. So that will get destroyed first. Then the next realm is the hungry spirit realm. That gets destroyed. And that next gets destroyed. And so then, as the lower realms get destroyed, the beings of the lower realms, their better karma has taken them out of the lower realms. So that when those realms are destroyed, the people are not there to have the typical end times. No. They say first the beings get emptied out, and then the realms collapse. So in a way, it's, you could say, a kind of a nice version of how this is destroyed. Because there are no people being burned alive or cut alive. But they say first fire would destroy, then water would destroy, and then wind would destroy. And all the way up till the highest realm of existence within this cycle, called the heaven of neither consciousness nor non-consciousness. And at that point, all the beings that still have the karma to be within this world system have taken rebirth in this very subtle plane of existence. That forget about physical, right? The physical bodies absolutely don't exist. But even the mental body is so subtle that you cannot say they have consciousness or they don't have consciousness. That's so subtle. And so they say, not according to this teaching that the Buddha gave in this sutta, it says, and they remain there. How long do they remain there? They remain there until their karma begins to ripen, meaning their less good karma, now they have to become more embodied. And as they need to be more embodied, more grosser levels of the universe begins to evolve. And evolve and evolve and evolve. From the subtle, which is this place called neither consciousness nor non-consciousness, then subtle consciousness, more obvious consciousness, and then levels and levels and levels of existence begin to form accordingly to meet the karmic needs of these beings. Finally, it is said that how the human realm evolves is because some of these luminous gods, at that point, these gods, they have forms, like I suppose you could say humanoid forms. But when they look down onto this, below where they exist, so this is actually described this way. They see a frothy substance floating down there. And so then they look at it and then they get curious. So then they land. And then they see this frothy thing. Then they taste. And they like the taste. But as they start to eat this frothy substance, their body becomes dense and denser and denser, and then they are stuck with a more dense body, with a physical body. Yeah. This is how the Aganya Sutta talks about. There is a side plot to this. So these luminous gods, relatively speaking, are fairly gross at that point in terms of having a gross form. More subtle form in the realms that are higher. When that realm was formed, it is said, obviously there is always like the first one that turns up, right? So then the first one that turns up in that particular heaven, if you want to use the word, although that's not a very good word, but, higher dimensions. The first being, it says, that turns up there, right? Now, karmically speaking, what makes him the first being to turn up there?
It's the worst karma.
Yes, the worst karma among the lot that is higher, right? So he turns up, right? Then the Buddha actually tells this, and you can sort of imagine, his sense of humor. Because he's talking to a group of people. Now you know where this story is going, right? So he said, this guy that first turned up, for millions and millions and millions of years, nobody else was there. It's just him. And for millions and millions and millions of years, he was fine with that. All right? It's like, all right? But after millions and millions and millions of years just being him alone, he thought, wouldn't it be nice if there were others? And then, poof, right? Or ploop, or I don't know what sound it would be. And poof would be to disappear. The opposite of poof, right? Others turn up. Yeah. So then when these others turn up, he goes, oh. And then the ones that just arrived looked around and they see. And so they go, who is that? Who is that guy? And these others like, well, we just got here. Maybe he caused us to appear. So they go to him and they say, did you cause us to come into existence? He said, yes, of course. Yeah, I was just thinking, let there be other people. And then they turn, and you guys turn up. So then these other guys said, you must be our creator. Yes, I created you. So that is the Buddha's telling of the God conceit. That everyone had a misunderstanding, and so that's how we ended up with an all-powerful creator God. Oh yeah, he's called Brahma, which is the creator God in the Indian world. Yeah, so this sutta is very interesting. It continues on to talk about the appearance of kings and rulers. I think I already mentioned that. Basically, there the Buddha is critiquing this very ancient idea, like it's amazing, right? It's 5th century BCE. You have him critiquing the notion of the divine, status of rulers and kings. He said, no, like they were just hired to, take care of the surplus. Then all the people who actually worked the land was too busy working the land. But then because of all this surplus and us needing to provide kind of like, civil service. So then they all got together and said, well, each of us, would take one portion of our stuff and give it to this guy, probably the guy who doesn't know how to hunt or plant, Right, that's bumper sticker. Like, what is the Indian word for bad hunter? Vegetarian. Yeah, so probably they found a guy and said, "Well, okay, you are not very good at growing. Here, we'll all give you one portion. You take care of all this mundane stuff, collecting surplus and providing." And I said, before long, the king conceit then came into existence. Then it became hereditary. Then everybody now look up to essentially the servant that we hired. Buddha tells this story. So very interesting, this particular sutta. It's been translated, you can look it up. And now some scholars are pointing out, there is quite, it's hard to translate humor, but surely, so in a way, right, we could say, is this a parody to make a point, or is this really what the Buddha understood and saw? This is how it evolved. Well, I'll leave it up to you. Right? Yes?
So, if there's different universes, so each universe has its wheel of life.
Mm-hmm.
So, and does each universe's wheel of life have that duty in it?
It's all characterized by impermanence.
And does every universe that and am I right to say that every universe did every universe have its Siddhartha Gautama?
No.
Not exactly Siddhartha Gautama, but someone who
Other Buddhists exist in other worlds and systems.
But some universes
Yeah.
don't
And some universes don't.
Okay.
Yeah, depending again on the karma of the beings that inhabit. So that's why there are references to how may not be born in a universe without a Buddha. Yeah, where the teachings are not available. It could be a universe filled of, party all the time. But ultimately, the show is going to end. I think you had a question or comment. Oh, okay, good. Yeah. Okay, now, moving on. So we talked about, right? Wait, is this right? Am I going forward or backward? Evolving or devolving? Oh yeah. So at the hub of this wheel of becoming are the three poisons, which is, delusive ignorance and attachment and aversion. Out of basic not knowing. And this not knowing is not just passive not knowing, it's active misknowing. So misconstruing, what is actually there. Thinking what is not there to be there. Mistaking that which is impermanent to be permanent. Mistaking that which is unsatisfactory to be somehow potentially satisfactory. Like, if only I get ... then I'll be happy, I'll be content. All of that, right? And then not knowing things as they are, then that gives rise to attachment and aversion. So in this wheel of becoming, these three animals are depicted. The pig is the delusive ignorance, the snake is the aversion, and the rooster is the attachment. Out of this inner hub, the next hub depicts positive or skillful actions leading to happiness, going up. Of course, this shows the monastic emphasis, you can evolve from a non-monastic to finally a monastic, right? So that's the best way, right? And then the devolution, so negative actions. Negative actions, meaning actions that are productive of suffering, will drag us down. Then the next hub is, as you recall, what's called the 6 or the 5 realms of existence, right? We looked at it in a little bit more detail earlier. Whoops. Didn't want to do that. Share again. What happened here? And then again, view. Full screen. Okay. No, it's going to do evil things again. Oh, wait. Need to play. Play. Okay.
It's fighting back.
I know. Play.
I think you have to reshare this screen.
Huh?
With this output
You're just
sharing.
trying to go back on the slides, right?
Now I'm not even trying to go back. What is going on? What is going on?
Try clicking stop share.
Oh, right.
Oh, Zoom share.
Okay, and reshare.
Yeah. Now this is it.
Everybody take a deep breath.
Or Brahma is upset for making fun of him. You never know. You know what, Brahma? I don't need this. You're seeing that? Yeah, good enough. 2 can play this. So,
I don't know if it's right now.
oh, it's not being shared. Oh, it's only my screen. Okay. Okay, let's try this. Let's try sharing again. Is it being shared, you think? Oh, yes. Okay, don't touch it. Don't know what's going on, but good enough. Ooh, I don't know. Let's see. Oh, okay. So karma, our actions then produces these 6 destinies with its corresponding psychological states, these 6 realms of existence. So here, karma literally means action. Now, among the Buddha's contemporaries, there were other spiritual teachers who taught, who emphasized like karma in different ways. So there was a form of spirituality which still exists today, but of course what they believe today about karma may not be how the Buddhists describe what they believed back then. Because after all traditions evolve and change and become more and more refined and all of that. But at least during the Buddha's time, it is said that what we today call the Jains, which exists as a minority religious community in India, like in contrast to Buddhists, the Jains will say that karma is any and all action. That as long as it is an action, whether it is a mental act, a physical act, or a verbal act, then once you act, you have created a karma. And that karma is what keeps you trapped in this cycle of birth and death. So for them, how to escape this cycle of birth and death is to find ways, and often extreme ways, to avoid any actions. So for example, it is not enough to not like create the karma of harming other lives. So Jains are vegetarians, but the really holy people in Jainism avoid eating, and in some extreme cases, eating like dead leaves. So not even eating vegetables, because that is a type of action that impacts others. And death by starving is held as the ultimate not doing. Although clearly not like universally recommended, right? But held up as an ideal, like when it comes time and you know that you're not going to live anymore, then the best way to minimize and exhaust your karma is to not do anything and starve to death. But the Buddha's explanation of karma was different. The Buddha says, actually, what makes karma? Karma is intention. Intentionality determines the quality of karma. So he further distinguishes that the chief determinant of whether an action, a karma, is virtuous or non-virtuous is the intention. Then, what we call virtuous action or karma is basically that which produces pleasant experiences as a result of. What we call non-virtuous is that which produces painful, undesirable results as a result of. So virtue and non-virtue in Buddhist talk is related to, is it productive of suffering or is it productive of happiness? Does it bring about pleasant experiences or unpleasant experiences? In a way, yes, the Buddha will say, in the ultimate sense, if you don't have a preference between happiness and suffering, then yeah, maybe you don't need to worry about this. But as long as you have a preference for happiness over suffering, pleasant over unpleasant, this becomes an issue. This you have to pay attention to. So this is in a nutshell, although I have a set of teachings, 6 lectures, 2 hours each, talking about karma. So in other words, and even that is just scratching the surface. There are nuances to this, but this is the general. So then karma, what we call the law of karma, is basically the principle of cause and effect, or karmic causality. But here again, it's not, right? So this is not karma. Yeah? because it has no moral implications. This becomes a karma, right? If pretend this is not a hat, this is like a block of wood, right? And there are like, I don't know, a little tiny puppy there, and I go, hey, kaplunk. That's karma. Yeah, that's karma. The intention to harm. So that's karma created. But otherwise, this is gravity. So cause and effect, not just cause and effect, because there are many types of cause and effect. Like gravity works on one kind of cause and effect. Here we're talking about a cause and effect that involves sentient beings. When you act it out, it has implications on another sentient being. Then karma is created. Yeah? And this principle operates on the principle. So how this principle operates is like produces like. So often it says, plant an apple seed, sprout an apple sprout, get an apple tree. Lots of apple, tasty apple, not tasty apple. Well, it depends on the quality of the seed. But an apple seed will never give you mangoes. Yeah? So then we already talked about the importance of intentionality. So this is in contrast to the Jain view, then some other views, then, like now our common idea of karma. The way we talk about karma is more like, you deserved it. Karma's gonna get you, right? And that's like us substituting it for God, God is gonna smite you for, doing something wrong. But the Buddha's view of karma and what he taught, it's different from. Yeah? And also, they said in these texts, they say, in fact, exactly how a particular result comes from a particular cause, and what are all the other conditions that led to that cause giving rise to this result, all the subtle points, only fully awakened ones, only Buddhists can see in its detailed manner. The rest of us, what we can and what we should see is the more general principle of like produces like. And that is also explains how, if you now live a life, that is like, that where you have habituated anger, resentment, and hatefulness, then when this mind and body separates, where the mind goes next is to latch on to what it recognizes most, which is an existence that is hateful, that is resentful, that is harmful. And they say that's what we call hell realm. If our mental state is always occupied with I want, then when this mind and body separates, since the body doesn't continue, but the mind does, then the mind latches onto a mode of existence that is described in this wheel of becoming as the realm of the hungry spirits, and so on and so forth. Judy?
Question here. What if you have legitimately good intentions but cause harm or suffering to sentient beings through ignorance?
Yeah, good question. If you have legitimate good intentions, but then through ignorance you cause harm and suffering to sentient beings, then the karma, that is the karma of ignorance. It's not the karma of harming beings. Yeah. It's not the karma of harming beings. It's the karma of ignorance. Yeah.
What does that mean? I mean,
Ignorance has consequences.
huh?
Ignorance has consequences.
Right. But, and that's one of the poisons, right?
The chief poison.
Okay, right, and it said, like with attachment, they can have another side, that attachment can actually provide connection to the right things, but ignorance is sort of the one that's not easy to have the other.
All the poisons are poisonous. Even attachment is poisonous. And it entails pain.
Dr. Lyon.
Yeah.
Isn't it also true, though, that a lot of our actions and intents have mixed karma? There's some good. and
Yes,
some-
very mixed.
So some
It's never
action can produce both good results karmically
And bad
good
results,
which
yeah.
are bad.
so.
Because it's not like you weigh them all together and say, it's good or bad in total.
Yeah, they're all ripen.
And good and bad karma
Yeah.
can be generated from the same intent and action.
Yeah, so actions are very subtle. If we really think about it, we never act due to one reason. Such a mixed bag of good intentions, not so good intentions, skillful, not so skillful, right? Even like a heroic act of self-sacrifice, it's never just that. There's a whole bunch of other things. And they all ripen accordingly. Yes.
So, like that was a block, like that was a brick, that happened.
Yes.
And you like dropped it.
Yes.
No puppy, just saying, no puppy.
Okay.
I really want to deal damage to that wood platform thingy.
Depends on intention.
Okay, and if you like intentionally want to like
Damage.
Damage it, but like it holds up, and like, I guess you like hit a dust mote that holds the universe in that carpet. What happens?
But you're not trying to destroy a universe.
Yeah, you're only trying to destroy the wood block.
Yeah.
Like, what's the karma in that?
The karma of destroying a wood block.
Okay, but like, if the wood block holds up though.
Huh?
If the wood block holds up,
Then it's not a complete karma.
but there's still the karma from that?
Yes, it's a particular kind of result.
And you still get karma from destroying the whole universe?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to have the knowledge that, there's a universe there and you're trying to destroy a universe. Oh, they do ask these questions, They're like, you are trying to kill Lawrence. Then you pick up an arrow and bow, right? And then instead, your shot is so bad and you shoot Joseph. And you shoot Joseph, right? It turns out, Joseph
Am I like?
is a great being about to become enlightened.
Right.
What kind of karma is that, they say? Yeah, so they have discussions like that in these Buddhist texts, And so then they'll say, well, it's the karma of trying to kill Lawrence, but unsuccessfully. And it's the karma of second degree murder of a Buddha to be. Yes. So there are all these kinds of debates.
My good karma.
Yeah, but for the most part, so then you also have to know that on the other side of this picture, right? The people who are the victims, they have their own karma ripening. So it's not so simple. Yeah. That's why they say only Buddhas can completely see all of this, and they warn us, don't try to be like a Buddha and try to figure it out because your head will explode before it happens. They say that, your head would explode before you can figure it out. Yes, another question, comment?
My understanding is that Buddhism often defines saying good things are bad and bad things are good?
Ish. Yeah. But if that's the chief cause of problems in this system, there is a lot more you need to know about what delusion is. There's only one. Yes.
So the karma of ignorance, if like produces like, does that mean if somebody does something extraordinarily stupid, like accidentally destroying the universe, they're just going to continue to get stupider?
Yes. They're going to get worse and worse and worse. Yeah. So that's why there is one position, especially in the Drikung Kagyu, the founder says, of the three poisons, he says. And he's not the only one saying, but famously he emphasized this. All the other traditions also say, yes, yes. So of the three poisons, right, they say, the easiest to get rid of, but the easiest to get rid of the three, and the most obvious, and therefore is the easiest to get rid of, is hatred. Because you can very quickly see what the problem is. And the karmic result of hatred manifests very quickly. You just have to walk up to someone and go, "Ah!" Right? And you can see that, the result. And then you can go, oh, that's bad. Don't do that, Then the one that is hard to notice that it's negative and hardest to get rid of is attachment, desire. Because the pain it brings is not so obvious. And usually after a while before you go, oh gosh, now I can't get out of this mess. Then ignorance is both hard to get rid of and hard to see. By definition, it's ignorance. Yeah. And so that's the one that is most dangerous. So then that has some implications on like the taking of vows and things like that. Following this reasoning, it says, better you take the vows and then, not be able to keep it, than not to take the vows and not even be aware of that these things are negative. So they say, when you take the vows, you take the precepts. Of course, you're not going to be able to perfectly keep them. If you can perfectly keep them, we define you as Buddha. So the purpose of taking those vows is so that they remind you, oh, that's not skillful. So I called it like the monks and nuns vows being the most extensive of all the vows in the rules of training is full coverage insurance. Most of us, we're like, no. I don't have money to pay for full coverage. I will just take collision. And if you only have collision coverage, please drive carefully. But the problem is we buy only collision and then we think, well, I can drive dangerously because I only have collision. That's how we are. We're like, I'm not a monk. I can do whatever I want. It's the equivalent of saying, I only have collision coverage, so I'm going to drive recklessly now. It's like, no. If you don't have full coverage, you better drive carefully. Yes?
Reminds me of the confessional practices with the concern of ignorance. Like there's the confessional practices where you like read through this practice and it's confessing all of these things. You're like, I didn't do those things. But
yes.
You're also like, well, I probably probably did do that and just didn't even know.
Register,
what
yes.
and this, so on that level, sort of like
Right.
purifying ignorance. That
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
I probably did do all that.
So there are these confessional practices that say, if I have killed the Buddha, if I have, robbed the monastery, some of us are familiar with those practices, like initially you're like, really?
Yeah.
I don't think so, but as you do it more, then you begin to understand like, well, I could have, and also then it's illuminating, what are serious actions. And watch out. Yeah, don't drive recklessly. The point is, right? The more fundamental point is don't drive recklessly. But if you can get insurance and if you can afford it, it's good to have it. Technically, you don't need insurance to drive. Just don't get caught. And don't crash.
Accidents.
Yes.
Don't injure anybody.
Yes. Or yourself. Yes. Yes.
Could you elaborate just a little more on attachment? You were talking,
Attachment brings pain.
just give me an example of, all kind of attachments.
Oh, yes.
And, okay, and describe that kind of pain or what kind of attachment, just to be more specific and how the evolution of that.
Tell me an attachment that doesn't involve pain.
Yeah, I can't think of it.
Oh, yeah, there's the answer.
Yeah, okay.
It's not a judgment. We are so stuck with the idea that if the Buddha says it's bad, right, that means you are a bad person. No, it's describing, right, the human condition. That we have all these things that make our lives complicated. That you have attachment doesn't make you a bad person. It's just describing a situation,
Imagine the suffering I went through when I was attached to those San Francisco 49ers. Talk about suffering. Awful.
Yes.
I was just gonna say, I guess, all things are impermanent, right?
Mhm.
So when you're attached to anything,
Yeah.
it's gonna
Because they change.
be gone
Yeah,
eventually
they change.
and cause suffering.
They change, we change, But often we just say, you have changed. I have not. Sure. That's the problem. We all change, And if we don't, attachment is the result, comes from the delusion of nothing changes. And if it changes, it's an accident. Yes.
What are the psychological states associated with the other destinies? Hell equals anger, hatred, hungry spirits equals greed.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they're
Yeah, so animal is ignorance, human is desire or ambition. And sometimes in some texts I've come across, it says laziness, complacency. Like, that's pretty good, it's not so bad, So that's like the wrong kind of contentment. And then the demigods, jealousy, and the gods, pride. Now, these six are also divided into the good and the bad. So although there are the six, right, mental states, it doesn't mean like if you practice a lot of pride, you'll be born in the God realm. Or if you indulge in jealousy, you become a demigod. No. In order to get to demigod and God, you also need a lot of good karma. But your good karma is tainted by pride or jealousy. Then that's how you get sorted out, so to say. The sorting hat, First of all, you have to have received the letter to come to Hogwarts. Yeah. So the three better realms. Then how it sorts out depends on what you have been kind of negatively shaped by. So like produces like. You gravitate in that direction. The prideful ones become the gods with a lot of good karma. The jealous type become demigods with a lot of good karma. Yes.
When I see people, sometimes you see someone who's so miserable and angry, it's like I look at them and I go, you know something? That person is in hell right here, right now. They are living hell. And then you see other people that are consumed with whatever ambition they have. I mean, you can see the tabloids in the grocery store. These people are consumed by all these afflictions, whether it's greed, jealousy, lust, all of them. I mean, you can just see it. It's all around. And of course, the animals, they're animals. And the hungry ghosts, the people that are just tormented by whatever.
Yeah, just throughout the day.
Yeah, they're already there. They're in the realm.
They and us, we cycle through the 6 realms, in and out. Sometimes we occupy 2 realms at the same time. 1 foot in one and 1 in the other. So you don't have to look too far to see the existence of the 6 realms within this one realm. So now, according to our list of lectures, the last lecture for today is actually on kind of the various forms of Buddhism, just have a general overview. I don't have a set of slides. I have a different set of slides that I want to share. But briefly, I want to say there's so many ways to think about all the different forms of Buddhism that exist today. And some of them use terms and names that I feel they don't belong together. Yeah, they are like comparing apples and oranges. And then in putting those things together like that, it generates misunderstanding with regards to this form of Buddhism or that form of Buddhism. For example, to say something like, all the different forms of Buddhism in the world today can be divided into the 3 vehicles. It's a very common, you'll come across, even major Buddhist publications will say things like that. Completely, unaware or apparently blind to the fact that the expression, the notion of 3 vehicles is particular to one type of Buddhism. So you have already privileged one form of Buddhism and trying to fit other forms, jam it into the 3 vehicles. Yeah? So 3 vehicle language comes out of a tradition of Buddhism that says there is Vajrayana, there is Mahayana, and there is Hinayana. So now there are Buddhists who call themselves Theravada. Well, what are we going to do with them? Well, they are the Hinayana, but we'll be polite. We won't call them Hinayana. We'll call them what they want to be called. But already we're privileging, right, a category that came out of a different context. So I'm particularly kind of sensitive, sometimes annoyed by people using, terms and rubrics that don't universally belong to everyone. Yeah. So if you ask me, I prefer to refer to the different forms of Buddhism by their cultural origins. Neutral enough. Tibetan Buddhism, or more general, Himalayan and Tibetan Buddhism, because that form of Buddhism is practiced across the Himalayan region. The Bhutanese would practice it, the Nepali would practice it, and many other groups. Chinese Buddhism, predominantly in Chinese cultural areas, not just the country called China. Korean Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, Sri Lankan Buddhism, Thai Buddhism, Burmese Buddhism. So these different forms of Buddhism basically arose over time when the Buddha Dharma teachings of the Buddha interacted with people and cultures. As cultures evolve, the isms evolved. The Tibetan Buddhism evolved. The Sri Lankan Buddhism evolved. And in that sense, it's still evolving because it's a living tradition. Yeah, so then we have the various types. Another way of dividing perhaps all these different groups is to say, what kind of canon, Buddhist canon, do they accept? Basically, there are three canons, like authoritative scriptures. The canon that is preserved in the language that we call Pali, an ancient Indian language, and the Buddhisms in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, Cambodia, Laos, they all consider that canon to be authoritative. And collectively, these Southeast Asian plus Sri Lanka, geographically it's not Southeast Asia, it's South Asia, Southeast Asian Buddhists, they collectively identify themselves as Theravada, which means the way of the elders, Theras. But even among them, more recent academic studies have shown that they don't necessarily, it wasn't all along that they saw themselves as Theravada. In part because that was the only Buddhism they knew, you know? What is the need to say, we are this type of Buddhism or that type of Buddhism? We're just Buddhist. So that the identity of Theravada in some ways became more articulated and in some ways more solidified when they started meeting other people who call themselves Buddhist. So then their identity as Theravada became more solidified as a historical process. The other canon is the Chinese canon, which is in classical Chinese, not even modern Chinese. That canon is authoritative for Buddhists in China and in the Chinese cultural areas, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and then Chinese communities all in Southeast Asia. But it's also authoritative for Koreans, for Japanese, and the Vietnamese. They all have the classical Chinese Buddhist canon. Consider that to be authoritative. The third canon is the canon that is preserved in Tibetan. And Buddhists in Tibet, obviously, in the Himalayan region, in Mongolia, in Bhutan, they all consider that canon to be authoritative. So that would be another way to talk about the various Buddhist groups. Yeah. Yes.
Are those different?
The content?
Are they essentially different?
You mean like the content of the canons, or the three canons? The content, yeah.
Are they all supposedly words of the Buddha?
Yeah. Okay. So how are the three canons? The content of the three canons? How are they different? Okay. Most of what is in the Pali canon, most of that exists in the Chinese canon. But the Chinese canon has maybe at least 2, if not 3 times more material than the Pali canon. The Tibetan canon has maybe a little bit less than the Chinese. So the Chinese canon is the largest canon. Now, bear in mind that then the regional forms of Buddhism, what's authoritative is not just the canon. There's still a lot of other things that they consider authoritative. And in terms of that, hands down, no question, the Tibetans have the most material. It's such a, in numbers, it's such a small population, but the number of texts that they have generated is just mind-boggling. People who have studied the production of text, not just the physical production of text, but the creative production of texts, like across human cultures, the Tibetans are like way up there. There are still Tibetan texts being discovered that have never been seen before. Oh, well, much less translated. Yeah. So not just the canon. In each of these Buddhisms, they have lots and lots of writings, right? So the canon, what's the equivalent of the canon? For the Christian, the canon would be the Bible. For Catholics, it's the standard Bible plus a number of books, the canon. Then beyond that, the Catholic Church has a lot of material, right? Written by the church fathers, by the, all of that. So likewise, in all these different forms of Buddhism, they have more texts. But if we are just talking about the canon, so to say, then there are three basic ones. The Pali, preserved in Pali, preserved in classical Chinese, and preserved in classical Tibetan. So no way to really go into, all these different forms of Buddhism. So I want to share with you one last set of slides, partly because it's fun. The other part is, it has to do with Buddhism in America, where we are now, quickly of like, how did we get here? Okay, see, it says do not print. I guess it's too much fun. Let's see, how do I? Hey, young person, I need a teenager. Oh, this is not what I'm looking for, actually. Not this one. It's okay, we can use this one. Yeah, let's go back to, but no, let's go, not this one. Actually, I don't want PowerPoint. I want, quit PowerPoint. I want, look for the equivalent. Oh, open this as, yeah, open this as Keynote. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Now, this is a set of slides that I prepared for a class long time ago called History, and you were in that class, I remember. Buddhist images and imaginations. So here, what kinds of images and imaginations of Buddhism that we have? It's a little dated, but still pretty good. I have not updated this set of slides. Buddhism in Hollywood. Part of, I think the public kind of goodwill and consumption of Buddhism in the West has to do with, somehow Buddhism and Hollywood became very friendly. So you have there Richard Gere, right? Who is the politician? Oh, wait. Oh, is it? Oh, okay. Yeah, so Buddhism and Hollywood, best buddies.
Because there's lots of Buddhists in California.
Yeah, but it's more than that. There's something, it became like, it's both the cause and effect, chicken and egg, you're famous, you want to be famous. Go hang out with the Buddhists. Beastie Boy, that's Adam Yauch of Beastie Boys. Then you have Steven Seagal. And of these three stars at one point, most associated with Buddhism, Steven Seagal was actually declared the reincarnation of some Buddhist saint from Tibet long time ago. Oh yes. Buddhists apparently, like God, work in mysterious ways. So Steven Seagal, right there, Tibetan monks are going up to him and, doing the traditional offering, and he takes his role very seriously. No grains of salt involved. Oh yeah. Time Magazine, America's Fascination with Buddhism. Brad Pitt, by the way, never considered himself Buddhist or tried to declare himself Buddhist, but that is from a movie called 7 Years in Tibet, where he played this Austrian climber that spent 7 years in Tibet, and 7 years in Tibet. You see 2 new movies, Celebrity Converts, and hundreds of books at Zest to Zen. I don't know. Up close with Brad Pitt, star of 7 years in Tibet, Some quote, I forgot where it came from, in 2005, some stars are looking for a little good karma. Kate Bosworth, because at that time, the Bodhisattva boyfriend, Orlando Bloom, was Buddhist. Or maybe still is, He belonged to this group of this Buddhist tradition called Soka Gakkai, Japanese Buddhist tradition. Other people were Tina Turner in the movie about her life. They talked about her conversion to Buddhism as well. Also Soka Gakkai. I already showed you Keanu Reeves at the beginning of this course, where he played the Buddha in Little Buddha. Yeah. Then in popular culture, there is a fragrance called samsara, which is like saying, this fragrance is called crap. Put it on yourself, Although, according to this, and this I got from, these are quotes. I didn't make this up. Samsara means the eternal cycle of life. It is an imaginary place, sacred and mysterious, where Orient and Occident meet. Samsara is the symbol of harmony, of absolute osmosis between a woman and her perfume. It is a spiritual voyage leading to serenity and inner contemplation. Yes. You want to smell samsara? Well, just start. Yes, an explosion of pure happiness, a shower of audacious opposites.
It's like impressively.
Yes, impressively ignorant. But samsara sells, Yeah, samsara sells, right? Even trying to sell a truck. I think this was a Toyota or some. Yeah, what does it say?
Gotta have one of everything. To be one with everything, you've gotta have one of it.
Everything.
In the outdoor apparel, so there's like the Sherpa brand and the Prana brand.
Yes.
And the Sherpa brand, if you read that, it says that they use the same symbol that I don't know what it means, but I think it's on the wall over there somewhere. And they say that they tie every piece of clothing that they make, it has that endless knot.
The endless knot, yes.
The last bit of it. I don't know, they have a good message, but I don't know what about using those symbols to make money. I don't know.
Yeah, what to say,
Ain't it awful?
Take off in hot pursuit of enlightenment.
In hot pursuit of enlightenment.
In your truck.
Sheer karma. And that is a Victoria's Secret tankini that very quickly protests shut it down and they withdrew the product. Yeah.
What are they selling? Just various products, right?
Various products, yes. CoverGirl is, I guess, a cosmetic.
And why did they shut it down?
The Tankini.
Oh. Yeah, I see that. I couldn't.
Yeah. Now you see what they shut down. Yes.
Well, I just missed it. I was looking elsewhere.
Yeah. Now it finally registered, right?
There it is.
And Buddhism sells, you know. So candles, Hollywood Buddha, see it for yourself. Yeah. And so now I will sound like I'm psychic, you know. But in about now it's what, mid-February? In a month's time, when you go to Whole Foods, which I know you go, don't try to deny it. When you go to Whole Foods and you're checking out, pay attention to the magazine. The famous blonde is going to turn up meditating again. Every spring, she appears on a magazine. Yes. And a blonde young woman meditating happily and serene. And on the cover, it will be something about meditation. Yeah. It turns up every spring. So it will turn up again this year. Okay? Now, of course, there's a history to Buddhism coming to the West. These are some of the ancestors, so to say, that were instrumental in the transmission of Buddhism to the West. Now, one caveat here, embarrassingly, myself, I have to point out, has fallen into this narrative, which is there is a whole group of these ancestors that are invisible to the American Buddhist consciousness. And by that we mean white American Buddhist consciousness. There's a whole group of ancestors that serve Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, Korean Americans, these masters and monks that have played central role in establishing Buddhism in America. But those Buddhisms are often considered by quote-unquote mainstream American Buddhist publication as too ethnic. Not because of the national origins of these teachers, because in this group, they are also Asian teachers, but because the primary audience of these Asian teachers have been white Americans, so they have been center staged. So it shows the power of that narrative. This slide I prepared, in my old life, more than 10 years ago. And since then, I've, become more alert and aware. Even myself, so it's not a blame game, even myself, hello, kind of went along with this narrative that these were the most important figures.
Because they brought them to
White America.
Yeah.
White America. Because they brought them to white America.
And they are the most important.
Yeah, all right.
But that's the biggest population.
Oh, no. The so-called ethnic American Buddhist population is way bigger.
Well, yes, but they're not necessarily reaching the white American. The white American is the bigger population of a potential population.
Potential population, but in terms of Buddhist numbers, insignificant.
Well, it's like the magazine one.
Yes.
They're not gonna show a brown-skinned girl
Yes.
from India, they're not gonna show.
Yeah.
a
So that kind of
Malaysian.
perpetuates a particular narrative. Now, I'm not trying to persuade you the narrative is good or bad. I'm just saying this is a particular narrative that we're blind to, that there are many other narratives that are possible. Back to Soka Gakkai, right? Soka Gakkai is one of the largest Buddhist groups in America, but barely noticed by the dominant Buddhist publications. They're trying to do better. I know that because I have friends now working for these Buddhist magazines that have seen, their blind spot. And why is Soka Gakkai not really known? Because majority of their American members are Black and Hispanic. They are about the only Buddhist tradition that has made real inroads into African American and Latino communities. Nobody notices them. Slowly,
When you were saying,
Yeah.
Other than white,
Mhm.
I thought that you meant Asian Americans. I didn't know that
Oh, yeah.
you meant.
Oh, a lot, in so many ways, we are blind to. There are other narratives of who are Buddhists, in this country. Yeah, so just take note,
Can
right?
you give a name of the Buddhist teacher that has been known for that? Did you say
Well,
his name?
no.
The Buddhist teacher who's been known for African American or
Organization, Soka Gakkai. Yeah,
spell that.
Sokagakkai. Which is also, I mentioned, Tina Turner is someone like Orlando Bloom. This particular narrative, these are some of the giants, in the transmission of Buddhism to America. Again, saying that is not to downplay the role of these figures, because these figures and their publications and their teachings are also read by Buddhists around the world, not just them, because their material is in English, and English is a powerful language. In Malaysia, when I grew up, I read some of these figures. So it's not to downplay. I'm just saying, there's many others that, did a lot too, but they don't turn up, in our consciousness. Yeah? So anyway, to point out who these figures, some of them are, D.T. Suzuki wasn't exactly a Zen master, but he was a spokesperson for the Zen tradition, and he was a very well-accomplished Japanese scholar and did receive some Zen training, but a public intellectual, so to say, that impressed many people. And so he taught, I think, even on the faculty for a while at Princeton University, and so he had that platform. And very soon, many intellectuals on the East and West Coast was very enamored by his presentation of Zen. But chiefly, he represented the Rinzai Zen tradition. And ironically, today, majority of Zen practitioners in America are not Rinzai Zen, but instead they are students of the various Soto Zen traditions. Rinzai maybe has about 10% of the Zen temples or centers in the US. Soto is about 90%. So the giant in the Soto tradition is this figure here, Shunryu Suzuki, and his book, so the other Suzuki. Shunryu Suzuki did not have the amount of books of D.T. Suzuki. But Shunryu Suzuki is one single book, and his students and his grand students dominated most of Soto, Caucasian Soto communities. A lot of them are students of Shunryu Suzuki, and he has one book, very thin book, very influential, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. It's become a classic. That's Shunryu Suzuki. very much about the same time of D.T. Suzuki. D.T. Suzuki, I forgot the dates, but earlier than Shunryu Suzuki. And Shunryu Suzuki did not go to all these intellectual circles. It said that when he first came, he came on a boat, landed in California, associated with the Japanese Soto temple and serving the Japanese community. Eventually, he rented a storefront in San Francisco. And he rented a storefront, and what he did was, every morning at 5 a.m., he sat at the display window as the storefront, and he sat and meditated. Every morning. He did nothing else. Eventually, enough people walked by and looked, what is this? They would come in and he would point and say, sit. So then they started sitting with him. And that's how he started. He says, just sit, don't talk.
What year was that?
Google omniscience. Somebody, I should have put the dates, but just look up. Not too long ago, so that many Soto teachers today are students of his. So that time frame, not that long ago. Then, of course, Thich Nhat Hanh, right? Now, he was one person that served both communities. The Asian community, specifically the Vietnamese community, and also the white community. So he had sort of influence in both of these worlds in the West. Although he was, he didn't live in the U.S. His main community was established in France, but he did come through. Same time D.T. Suzuki, but native, so to say, was Alan Watts. Very influential in terms of being very creative in his interpretation of Buddhism and Zen, and so kind of form a bridge. I think he was also ordained as an Episcopalian priest, so he kind of bridged these worlds.
Did he follow Soto's work?
Alan Watts, sort of D.T. Suzuki did influence, but no, I don't remember the details, but no real master-disciple relationship. Red was very prolific, and when I say very creative, I don't mean out there. You can trace where his ideas come from, grounded in Zen, but using a language that appealed to many people during that time. These are like the hippie years. This figure here, G.U. Kennett, was an English woman that became a Buddhist nun, first in Malaysia, actually, then in Japan, and trained in a Soto monastery in Japan, then established a Soto community in Northern California on Mount Shasta. They have a place called Shasta Abbey. Her influence is not so strong because her successors didn't really, form a strong network. But nonetheless, it has been an important community in terms of her writings. Her writings are a little bit different from the Soto writings of Shunryu Suzuki. And for a long time, people thought that maybe she kind of made up these things, because in her writings and her way of talking about Soto, it included a more what we would call esoteric traditions. Shunryu Suzuki's Soto meditation was more, for lack of a better word, more Protestant, kind of pared down. But G.U. Kennett had all these what people would consider, for a long time, they thought she was just mixing things up. But now we have more understanding that no, she represents a legitimate Soto tradition, well and alive in Japan, where it is not just sitting meditation. There are many other elements of Buddhist practice folded into the tradition that she represented. And so I felt it's important to recognize, what tough, really tough woman. Because in Japan, first you're an outsider. Secondly, you're a woman. But she insisted that you have to train me. The monasteries were not used to having women. She's like, I'm here. And would not budge, Philip Kapleau represents a minority tradition in Japanese Zen insofar as Japan, but became influential in this country. His Japanese teachers were a hybrid tradition of Soto and Rinzai Zen. In fact, effectively in Japan, those teachers called themselves a new lineage. They called themselves the Three Jewels lineage, kind of to rise above the Soto and Rinzai like rivalry. The denominations never quite like fought, like you are heretics or anything, just rivalry. He was a student of this lineage of masters that combined Rinzai and Soto. Philip Kapleau his main center is in Rochester Zen Center. And his writing that was very influential was The Three Pillars of Zen. Now I say Philip Kapleau, I might be making a mistake. This could be Robert Aiken. Yes, somebody out there might know. This could be Robert Aiken. Robert Aiken was another important teacher of that same generation, but his community was in Hawaii. And he likewise came from a hybrid tradition. And so you had Philip Kapleau in Rochester, upstate New York, and two of Kapleau's students are the anchoring teachers at Windhorse Zen, just outside of Asheville. There's another important figure in Soto Zen, colleagues of Shunryu Suzuki, is Maezumi Roshi, and one of his successors anchors Great Tree Zen Temple at Tejo. Yeah, so we're not talking about that far back. Shunryu Suzuki, his time coincided with this Tibetan Buddhist teacher called Chogyam Trungpa, which produced many books, very influential in the development and establishment of Tibetan Buddhism in this country. For a while, he looked to Shunryu Suzuki as one of his spiritual guides, even though he was trained and brought up in Tibet. In fact, in the early days of Trungpa's organization called Shambhala, Shunryu Suzuki is one of the photos on the shrine. Just over time after Trungpa passed away, then slowly, Shunryu Suzuki's picture disappeared.
Which one is it?
Shunryu Suzuki, this one.
No.
Trungpa, over here in the yellow. Yeah. And he's dressed in a Japanese Zen master's robes because he really liked Zen. And so Shambhala aesthetics is basically a hybrid of Tibetan and Zen. Yeah. This is, I forgot his name, but I think he is a teacher to this Aiken or Philip Kapleau? Okay, yeah, I thought it was Kapleau, but then I was like, wait, there's Robert Aiken. It's the Diamond Sangha in Hawaii. Yeah.
You don't have any Theravada in Sakura, do you?
No, the earliest generation, the Theravada teachers were not here yet. So it's somewhat chronological.
Is that like Jews Buddhism?
Much later. Yeah.
Is that Theravada?
Yes. But that is again an oddity because Theravada is very monastic. But our main Theravada representative in the Americas tend to be lay teachers. But Theravada in the old country, so to say, it's a very monastic tradition. Yeah. So next, in terms of about the same timeline, this generation is in fact this Chinese Buddhist teacher here, Xuanhua, Venerable Xuanhua. Now, he did have Western students, especially when he first arrived in San Francisco. He set up a temple, small temple in Chinatown in San Francisco. Then these hippies wandered in, and then became his disciples. At the same time, the Chinese community in San Francisco also followed him and became his disciples. His Buddhism was a very different form of Buddhism. For one thing, he emphasized monastic training. So not for everyone. And not just monastic training, but very strict monastic training, almost like austere. I count him as one of my teachers, actually, because I read about him. So like growing up in Malaysia, if you didn't know classical Chinese, which I wasn't trained in that growing up, my first language, my first educated language is English. Only later on, when I was in graduate school, I picked up classical Chinese. And so I'm ethnically Chinese in Malaysia. And so most of my other ethnic Chinese who are interested in Buddhism basically strongly connected with the Theravada tradition. Because the Theravada monks in Malaysia that were actively teaching tended to be Sri Lankans, and Sri Lankans, English is their educated, one of their languages that they're educated in. So we had missionary monks that spoke English, but I was an oddball, that I was looking for like Chinese Buddhist teachers. And they came in the form of these books published by this group in San Francisco. Eventually, they started a big monastery in Ukiah, Northern California, called the City of 10,000 Buddhists. And so this master, Xuanhua, here, seated here, and what you're seeing here are two sets of his disciples over a number of years. This might be the same two people. One of them to this day is still a monk and obviously a leader now in that community. The master has passed away. What you're seeing here is they made this journey from they like drove down to Southern California and they made a spiritual pilgrimage to Northern California to their monastery, doing what's known as 3 steps, 1 prostration. So they made that whole journey up the coast of California. Took them like 3 years. And so a whole set of journals were published. Really interesting. If you want to kind of know, not just about them, but the people they met, it's fascinating. The regular Americans that they met along the way, being yelled at, being invited to meals, and then them having to explain, no, we can't eat burgers, stuff like that, and no, it's afternoon, we can't eat. So austere, because in the Chinese tradition, for the most part, monks and nuns do eat afternoon, but in this case, in this teacher, he said, no, we keep to the original rules. We do not eat afternoon. So this is, and then of course, Jack Kerouac, Dharma bums. And this is sort of, representative of even attitudes towards Buddhism that we find today in the more popular culture, right? I don't give a damn about the mythology and all the names and national flavors of Buddhism, but was just interested in the first of Shakyamuni's Four Noble Truths. All life is suffering. And to a certain extent, interested in the third, the suppression of suffering can be achieved. So there was a nihilistic, definitely overlay of the attraction to Buddhism. And died by suicide, I think. Yes?
Do you consider any of the other teachers that you spoke about as a teacher of yours or someone?
No, because I never really met them. I read their books and things like that. With Master Xuanhua, I took my lay vows and my refuge and lay vows with him when he came to Malaysia. I was very stubborn. I didn't want to do it with anybody else in Malaysia because they were not serious enough. And so I wrote I wrote him, or whoever reads his stuff, asking for the refuge ceremony. So the letter came back and said, yes, we have to do it long distance, but before it can happen, you have to make 10,000 prostrations. Finish that and then tell us, and we'll take it from there. So there I was, 13. Parents thought I've lost my mind. Doing 10,000. Yes.
Isn't that a Vajrayana approach?
Not necessarily, although it's unusual. Just to take refuge, 10,000.
And to take refuge at 13. And you said you did it a long distance, so they were not there.
No. So I did my 10,000 prostrations. Then I wrote back, and then they send my name, and then they say, when he comes, you can go do the formal one. And then at that point, then I also took my lay vows. Several years later.
Can you say what your name is?
You consider yourself a Zen Buddhist?
No. Chinese Buddhist is part of my heritage.
Zen.
Not necessarily. Chinese Buddhism didn't really have clear sectarian separation.
So you're a hybrid Buddhist?
Yeah, I've always been, I think. Part of my biography somewhere you can read, is for many of us growing up in Southeast Asia, in the Chinese community in Southeast Asia, basically Buddhism is Buddhism is Buddhism. Yeah, didn't matter to us whether it's a Thai monk or, Chinese nun, or they are part of the monastic Sangha. We take refuge in the Sangha. They taught the Dharma. We learned the Dharma. We all look to Shakyamuni as the Buddha. Those are the three jewels. In many ways, Malaysian Buddhism is sort of like a version of Buddhism in America, I feel. Yeah. In America, even though, people choose, I'm now practicing in this tradition, but influences come from all directions of Buddhism. People practicing Tibetan Buddhism have read Shunryu Suzuki's Zen Mind Beginner's Mind, influenced by that. People who practice Zen have read Chogyam Trungpa and then influenced by that. People who even practicing Theravada, have read Shunryu Suzuki, have been influenced by Thich Nhat Hanh. So it's very hybrid in a way, American Buddhism itself. So there's a certain recognition, there's a certain resonance for me to see the various types of Buddhism. In all the other Asian countries, except for Southeast Asia, meaning Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, in all the other countries in Asia, it tends to be one single tradition dominating the whole culture. But because in part in Malaysia, the Chinese community is a minority community. And majority of Buddhists in Malaysia are ethnic Chinese. So then when Thai Buddhists settled there, like monks, Burmese Buddhists, Tibetan Buddhists, didn't matter to us, You're Buddhist? Here, come. You're Buddhist? Oh, you want to build temple? Sure, we'll help you. We took whatever Buddhists we could find, including American Buddhists. There's been a couple of, what is his name? They call him Father Sumangalo, American. He became a monk in Asia, then settled in Malaysia, and he started one of the influential Malaysian Buddhist lay organization. Or he was a monk, and he was very influential in the development of Buddhism in Malaysia. So it didn't matter to us, you're Buddhist, we grab. Until now, you're Buddhist, so yeah, you can stay in our temple, no questions asked. Yeah. So we have had that, non-sectarian, so to say. Then, of course, a later wave that came. So first you have the Zen wave, for the most part. And then a later wave that kind of captured the national imagination. Because the Zen tradition did capture kind of the American national imagination. The next wave that came was Tibetan. And largely because of the political events in Tibet. And largely, we have to say, the Dalai Lama's profile. Trungpa was more like the people who became, born again Tibetan Buddhists, or born again some other Buddhists. The Dalai Lama was more popular national awareness. And with the Dalai Lama, so much so that, doesn't happen so much now, but maybe 20 years ago, someone will see a monk and say, Dalai Lama, Dalai Lama. It's like, no, that's a Lama, not the Dalai Lama. Yeah. So then Tibetan monks, did all these performances in very public places, like these Lama dances. Here, now I go back to American Buddhists, but Chinese Americans and their communities. This is a monastery in California, in LA, Hacienda Heights, the Buddha-Lite Shilai Temple. The founder just passed away a week ago, or a few days ago, in Taiwan. Unfortunately, they came to national prominence when they were subpoenaed by Congress to testify, because Al Gore did some fundraising there, and these innocent nuns, didn't have any idea what was going on. They all attended the fundraiser, each paying $5,000 for, a meal held at the monastery. Then later, like, wait, where does this $5,000 come from? Lay Buddhist practice is a strong element in the West. This is pictures from a particular Western Tibetan Buddhist community. Their main group is in England, but they have a presence too here. And so then some of these traditions emphasize, even though laity, they emphasize like the cultural aspects of Tibetans as well. Monastic emphasis is not so strong, generally among the Tibetan traditions in the West. Now, this is the generation that is still active in California. These are the Theravada teachers, but oddly lay, when Theravada is such a monastic tradition. There are lay teachers in Theravada, like particularly in Thailand, and some women teachers are lay teachers. But it's disproportionate, the number of American Theravada teachers who are lay people. At one point or another, they were monks for a short period, when they were in Asia mostly. So this is actually English. Stephen Batchelor and his wife. He started in the Tibetan tradition of the Dalai Lamas, then later became a Korean monk, then later left. He is sort of like championing what he calls Buddhism without beliefs. One of the key figures in like secular Buddhism, Stephen Batchelor. This is Maezumi Roshi and the other Soto, influential Soto tradition. That is, what is his name? Bernie Glassman, that has an active Zen community in New York City. Later in his life, he gave up his title of Zen master, and he officially was Bernie the Clown. So that's the clown nose, Bernie the Clown. It's like he's going beyond. Yeah, I mean he articulated it that way. And it's not like he repudiated his Zen training. He says, but no, I don't want to be a Zen teacher to be on the stage, you know. And he did clowning, and then went to basically clowning as I think a form of therapy for kids. Yeah, and he famously held these Zen sessions. That means intensive meditation in New York City, but instead of fancy spas and retreat centers, he famously held a good number of homeless Zen sessions. So you would gather at the beginning of the retreat for 7 days, surrender all your money. At that time, no cell phones yet. Surrender all your money, and they'll meet twice a day, like in Central Park. And then after that, you go live homeless life and experience homelessness. So very much involved in these social issues. They also started, I think, one of the most successful bakeries, but hiring basically homeless people. Bernie Glassman and his, so that's like part of his, I think, his community here. That's his teacher. Teacher is not my anyway. Katakiri, maybe getting used now. The group in England, in Wales, on parts of Tibetan culture. Back to popular culture. Any of you know this TV series way back? Kung Fu? No?
I've seen a couple of.
Oh, yeah. And then they made a little later series called Kung Fu Then Continues. It's like his son. Yes. That's because it's based on Shaolin. So there is a monastery in southern China associated in the Chinese popular imagination as masters of Kung Fu. So it's not entirely imaginary. Even in the Chinese imagination, Shaolin and its monks. Oh yes, Joe is going to advocate for his movie again. So that's it, we're way over time. But I thought that we should end up with Buddhism in America. These are our ancestors, so to say, direct or indirect. But these are our ancestors. And it's good to know, like where we came from. Good to know what our blind spots are. And overall, I think Buddhist communities are becoming more and more aware of, what our blind spots are. And to look beyond to see, what else is out there. So that's it. So one announcement, we were going to have a work day, right, this Saturday, and that has been postponed to the following Saturday. Yeah, so take note, not this Saturday, the following Saturday, because this is going to be a very cold, potentially wet Saturday. Maybe even a little bit of a wintry mix. So next Saturday, and next Saturday, after all the work, we have a movie night. And that is on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And I'll be here and I'll talk about, what we're going to see afterwards. It's short, it's just under an hour, I think. So we'll have some discussions and all of that. Then at the end of the month, the last Saturday of the month, we begin a new series. You can look at the flyer there and look at some of the kind of requirements if you're going to attend that. Please take note. What else?
So next Thursday here is just like meditation.
So next Thursday, good. We go back to our regular format, open Sangha. Half an hour of meditation, 15 minutes of snacks and tea and catching up with each other, 45 minutes of discussion and readings. Whenever I'm in town, I will anchor. Otherwise, other people anchor. But more and more, I would like other people to also anchor. There's a certain freedom, when I'm not in the room. It's good to kind of go away or hide away from time to time. But Thursdays, and that is, I would say, our most accessible program. And I encourage people to come to that. We have a good group, a good community. So we go back to that regular format for a while. Then at some other point, maybe we start another series. The next series that I might start, and also then available to those of you who are on Zoom, I don't know when yet, it will be a series more on Buddhist practice, introduction into Buddhist practice. Then it will be less historical, less, intellectual. But now it will be more like, so you want to be Buddhist, huh? That kind of a series. Yeah. So that's possibly the next series. And that usually, I've done that course before. It's organized into the three jewels: Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. But geared more towards like, okay, now I think I would like to be Buddhist. So the point about being Buddhist, let me just say, it's not as serious as you think it is. A lot of people think, oh no, I can't, I can't. Then when I probe a little bit more, it turns out what they're saying is, oh no, I can't be the Dalai Lama. Yes. It sounds funny, but that's what people think of, like only he can be Buddhist. I would never, measure up.
Can I really be Buddhist?
Yeah, can I really be Buddhist? It's I have to be the Dalai Lama. Oh, no way. Yeah, it's not like that at all. Yes, so I can say that much. Yeah, it's not such a big deal. It is, a commitment of a certain type, but it's not exclusive in a way that you now cannot believe in other things. To become Buddhist is to begin, a certain mode, I would say, of relating to things. So anyway, maybe that course will come at some point soon. And stay tuned. Thank you for coming. And Shana is getting ready for the most important part of the night, the snacks. See, when you don't come here, you don't get snacks. Bye.
Muchas gracias.
Yeah, sure.
Gracias.
Yeah.
They say like